When we're working with the cradle, I often find it really helpful to think of the bow and the violin as a single unit. Um, this is, in a sense, true because in modern violin playing, we pretty much all agree that the bow needs to remain perpendicular to the strings for the entire bow stroke, and that the violin has to remain fairly close to parallel to the floor. So we don't want to have like a drooping scroll or one that's way up here. So there are certain constraints that we all have to deal with, regardless of how long our bow arm is or how wide our chest is. We can see that if we change the relationship of the instrument to the body, that changes what happens in our bow arm. What you'll often find is that in order to figure out where to place the chin plate in this regard, basically along this continuum, going from progressively more center mounted to side mounted, the key element to consider in this regard is the length of the bow arm. So if we have a longer bow arm, say like myself, if I look straight down the strings and move the chin plate into a more center mounted position, it forces my bow arm into this position when I'm at the frog. And basically what's happening here is my bow arm doesn't have enough room. It's too long for this space because the distance from here to my shoulder is much, much shorter than my bow arm is long. So in another video, we talk a little bit about how this position is a little bit problematic in terms of the actual motion we can get out of it. So if we want to move away from this and we want to get into something more like this where we have a neutral wrist and we're carrying the elbow, then instead of monkeying around with the bow arm and the placement of the bow arm and looking in the mirror and trying to make the bow straight, I often find it really helpful to start modifying the relationship of the instrument to the body. So there's sort of three ways that we can go about changing the path that the bow is traveling, because basically that's what we're trying to do here. We want to change the bow path from here and we want to move it out here so that we can relax that wrist. So to do that, we can swing the scroll like that, and that would be analogous to just rotating the chin plate. You would rotate the cradle's chin plate kind of like that. And that allows us to relax the wrist into a neutral position and to carry the elbow. But when we use this exclusively, you can see that what we end up with is here's the center line of the body, right? And everything is happening really far over on the left side of the body. So we end up in a little bit of an unbalanced position. We've got a lot of weight over here, a lot of stuff happening over here. And so what you'll often find is that the lower body and the spine sort of twist in the opposite direction. So we'll have lots of stuff happening over here and we're twisted in the opposite direction because we have to try and our body is basically trying to compensate for everything moving over here. So we don't really want to use just swinging the scroll exclusively. It's one of the options that we have, but using it exclusively tends to lead to unbalanced positions. So probably my favorite thing to do, and something that is really only possible with the cradle, is to keep the scroll where it is, but then we swing the button. So if you watch what I do here, I'm going to keep the scroll where it is, and then as I move the button sort of more in front and kind of down the chest a little bit, it moves the angle of the strings in relation to my body so that I can relax the right wrist into neutral position. This is different than swinging the scroll because you can see that this is farther over here, whereas if I go to this position, then the bowing motion is happening basically in the center line of the body. It's more in front of the body. There's less of a need to twist to balance. And it brings the instrument as low, it keeps everything low on the body, so you're not raising anything up. Everything is, you can kind of settle into the string in a sense. So this is my favorite way, and the reason the cradle allows us to do this is because this kind of a motion, often players who need the instrument in this position are those who tend to have, say, a medium, short, and longer bow arm. And you'll need to be moved progressively this way the longer the bow arm is in order to give your bow arm enough room. But those folks often also have longer necks because it seems that longer bow arms tend to go with longer necks, like the two are related in a certain sense. So the problem is that ordinary chin rests, those that are taller tend to be center-mounted chin rests because I have to go over the tailpiece. But center-mounted chin rests, again, they kind of put my arm in this position. So if I favor the length of my neck, my bow arm might be kind of almost forced into this position. And then if, with the cradle though, we're given the option of having a taller side-mounted chin rest, which is what is needed when we want to move the instrument like this. We need to go to progressively side-mounted, but we still need to allow our neck to remain nice and tall. So the cradle allows us to do both. And the lateral adjustment of the cradle allows us to, this motion often requires that we move the chin plate closer to the neck. Because if the chin rest follows the curve of the instrument here and doesn't go any farther out, then what we'll often find when we move this way is that our chin cuts across the back edge of the chin rest, or we can't even quite reach it and keep our neck nicely stacked on top of the spine. So the cradle will come towards us, it'll move progressively side-mounted and allow us to satisfy both the length of our arm and the length of our neck. Now, if you happen to have, say, arms that are on the shorter side, you may benefit from looking more straight down the strings. And in those cases, center-mounted chin rests might be more beneficial in that regard, because that will, people with shorter bow arms than myself may find it a little bit more challenging to reach the tip of the bow. And so in order to do so, they have to move the path the bow must travel over closer to the right side of the body. So that's kind of the relationship that we're looking for in terms of the chin rest and how it integrates with the violin, which determines the positions that we have in the bow arm and therefore the motions that we can access in the bow arm.